welcome to all of you, now that we've got everybody's claims to fame out of the way, and I've been corrected for not the first time here on stage, as happens. So let's kick things off with Sinho, and I think that there's an opportunity for folks to think about how big data plays such a role in this, and it's necessary for machine learning and natural language processing to be effective, to have sort of as big a data set as possible is sort of, I think, how many people think of it. The more data, perhaps the more insights you can potentially draw from it. And so needing to collect that from hospitals, in your case, or centers or communities, but they may not want to share that. There's a sense of privacy, of course, involved with all of this. How do you think blockchain technology could help make this possible, could alleviate any of those concerns, if you will?
Like blockchain, the artificial intelligence is a big hot issue these days, especially in healthcare domain. To improve the performance of AI, we like to use a big data set. Also, the big data set means it should be high quality big data set. It's very hard to collect the big data set in the healthcare domain. For example, like Harvard Medical School, we are lucky to have many years of digitized healthcare data set is in-house, so that we could develop AI algorithm. But small hospitals or people like to develop the AI algorithm in the healthcare domain. It's very hard to acquire, to curate this healthcare data set. The problem is, even though you have a small data set of healthcare informations, it's very hard to achieve a high performance of AI algorithm without huge data set. Small hospitals or each hospital, because of regulation also initially, but now they realize that data set is great asset for each hospitals. They don't want to share their data set. So how can we make this happen to improve AI performance and make a high performance AI algorithm to the market? So we like to give a reward to hospitals, and also patients or people like to share their data set. That's one of the way we can use blockchain technology in this field.
And Dr. Leming, maybe with the same question to you in terms of the sensitivity around big data sets, and what could be mitigated through blockchain. Is the transparency aspect of it help to perhaps tackle some of those issues?
Right, precisely. I think Australian is developing a national AI strategy and also an AI ethical framework. So DataG1 is driving that effort. So through the exercise, we've realized there's indeed a lot of the interesting AI use cases requires collaboration between organizations. And if data is the new oil and has any value, why would anybody share their data with their competitors? So I think one way blockchain technology could solve that is to have incentives and collaboration models without actually necessarily sharing the data itself through the chain. We all know blockchain is not suitable for sharing big data, but sharing the degree of contribution. What sort of data you have given to your collaborators, and how do you get the reward back, as the other panelists mentioned, and how do you sometimes shape your algorithm, AI algorithm, and compute to the data without actually putting the sharing the data with your collaborators or sometimes your competitors to have joint analytics, extract value from it. So blockchain introduces transparency, blockchain introduces integrity of the data you are sharing, it introduces some incentives, and also it's a way to ensure the model and the data these days are the integrity in it and have important attributes that we rely on them to make life critical decisions.
Chris, these technologies that we mentioned as tech titans, if you will, kind of coming together, of course, have been around for many years. Artificial intelligence dating back to the 1950s, 1960s with its origins, and blockchain and decentralization is arguably not new per se. Why do you see this? Why do you see the two of them coming together? Actually, maybe first you could talk a bit about MOBI and how those align, but why is there such appeal between these two different technologies?
Yeah, so MOBI is the Mobility Open Blockchain Initiative. It's a consortium of most of the world's large automakers, a bunch of big tech companies, a ton of startups, a bunch of NGOs, and all exploring this convergence of AI, IoT, and blockchain. So I think most of the members would say that those are the three pillars of the digital future, and they all work together in an important way. Just adding on to what the previous speaker said about the large data sets and machine learning being important, we have the same problem in the development of autonomous cars. It may take 1 trillion kilometers or more of driving before we can really get to level 5 safe anywhere, anytime cars. No company has anywhere near that much high resolution, high sensor data. Google has maybe 20 million miles or so a long, long way away. The only way the companies will get there and produce safe cars anytime soon is by sharing data sets, and blockchain offers a potential way to do that by sending algorithms to the data so that you don't have to give up your secret sauce valuable data. So that's just as an aside for another use case for big data and blockchain and sharing. In terms of where these three converge, there are something like 20 billion IoT devices today. That's doubling every 2 or 3 years. Cars are increasingly connected, and they're some of those 20 billion. So if you just do the math, 20, 40, 80, 160, you get to 1 trillion connected devices in 5 to 10 years, depending on how fast the doubling rate is. And then each one of those devices is going to be communicating potentially with other connected devices and sharing its data. And as the speaker over here mentioned, in order to provide incentives to do that, you have to have a transaction, you have to make a micropayment, perhaps a tokenized payment for that. And so there's the intersection of big data, IoT devices producing that data, and the blockchain creating the incentives to share and trust that data. So that's how it fits together.
And so many opportunities within that. And Susan, one of the sort of concerns that arises out of artificial intelligence is the ethics involved with how you create any sort of machine learning or natural language processing, and if you come into it with some sort of bias, that's going to be reflected in the artificial intelligence. Does the idea of blockchain help to tackle the ethics side of artificial intelligence in some way?
Hi, can you hear me? All right. So I think ethics is a very large and broad term, and there are people in the use of data within artificial intelligence that have different opinions, and there's also a great deal more collaboration than meets the eye. A lot of people tend to mistake AI as this sort of like siloed space. There actually is, at an academic and research level, and certainly within papers and public groups, a lot of collaboration and discussion about bias in data. So the most obvious example that people normally give is, how we talk to computers is by, classifiers. These are binary questions that help us structure the data, right? So, is this a fireman? Is this a fireman? And then if a picture of a woman pops up, it says no, because it's only been fed pictures of male firemen. I mean, that's just a gross, oversimplified example, but that's the kind of biases that we're talking about. Proponents of big data will tell you that their algorithms or their bots have a higher or better rate of evolution than human beings do, and that they'll adjust for biases within the big data sets. Yes and no. I don't have any concrete examples to come across this, but the reason why about 2.5, 3 years ago I started synthesizing models for blockchain and AI integration was because for the first time I went from learning how a training corpus and machine learning algorithms work to actually building my own training corpus as a how-to. And the data was expensive, it was painstaking to collate and code that each line. So then when I came across blockchain, I thought, okay, well then I can crowdsource the tagging and labeling of the data, which is a precursor to supervised learning, the very most rudimentary part. And it's painstaking. Why am I paying a data scientist or a junior developer, $150,000 a year to click yes or no on these dots when I can turn it into a cute little quiz and have people train it for me. And so, yes, blockchain features, as long as it allows for a collaborative framework to be able to encode how we share parts of anonymized, aggregated data, because private information should never, ever go on blockchains. And remember, at the end of the day, a blockchain is an unwieldy, novel data structure that does not hold data. It could only show us the hashes and the transactions of that data as it dips in and out of enriched networks, which sometimes tend to be a black box. Right, so that's the way that I wanted to integrate it, was that it would give that transparency of transaction from machine to humans, but also machine to machine as it was learning. And so I guess the long and short of it is that as long as you can input transparency into your system, then there is, I guess, the beginning or the precursor steps towards ethical or humane development of AI. But having said that, there are GANs networks that are not threatening to people, and they work perfectly well when it's machines against machines and bots against bots that are, I guess, trained adversarially.
And Abdallah, over to you. Just same question, I suppose, but thinking of it from a Maltese government or Australian government point of view, what are nations doing at that level to think about tackling ethics within AI, and how much does blockchain play into that for you?
Yes, I mean, first of all, thank you for having me, and it's a great pleasure to be a part of this panel. When it comes to artificial intelligence, like my fellow panelists said here, it thrives on data acquisition, filtration, processing, making sense of large data sets, extracting valuable insights from it. However, also there are sensitive information that sometimes are related to things like identities, etc. In Europe, we're nowadays governed by certain legislations, from GDPR to others, the right to be forgotten, the right of erasure, which sometimes makes it a little bit difficult on various fronts, whether it's for the AI to be able to use that data that is related to a specific individual for learning purposes, or for certain information to be, or the hashes of that information to be stored on a blockchain, whereby it's completely immutable and you cannot get it out of there. So there are a number of challenges, and the approach we take in Malta is quite holistic. In Malta, we set up, like we said in a previous panel, a digital innovation authority that was established first and foremost to regulate technology arrangements and services, starting with DLT, decentralized ledger technology, out of which blockchain is an architecture, but with a vision from day one to move into AI, IoT, esports, etc. We started with the blockchain regulatory framework, and with blockchain it was quite clear. You have a technology, you can define that technology, you can define the various architectures of how that technology can be manifested, and you can come up with certain guidelines, policies, and certification mechanisms for that technology. And that was the first step, and the laws were enacted last year. They came into effect at the end of last year, and now we are issuing certificates. The second frontier was artificial intelligence, and the government set up an artificial intelligence task force, out of which I'm a proud member, to set up the national strategy for artificial intelligence. However, unlike blockchain, artificial intelligence in general, as intelligence, is incredibly abstract. No two people would ever agree on a definition for artificial intelligence. So the regulatory path for that is obviously the wrong path, which is what we have established. So we decided to look at it from a strategy standpoint. How can we create strategy that helps Malta to become a launchpad for AI initiatives, to attract investors, startups, public sector adoption, private sector adoption, and also catering for certain ethical issues within frameworks that are established within our own laws, but also within the European Union laws that obviously we are governed with. It is a challenge because, like we said, certain regulations and laws sometimes impede the innovative process, but we are noticing that a lot of innovation is coming out, a lot of innovation is being proposed to tackle these kind of regulatory hurdles that are out there, which is good because once you create the environment and you establish an ecosystem that's based on digital innovation, you establish the pillars for the digital innovation, in our case being blockchain, AI, and IoT, And like my fellow colleague said earlier, nowadays these are all converging. We're noticing a lot of projects that are actually coming up with innovative and very creative ways that are within these frameworks that solve such problems.
I'm going to ask the next question for Dr. Liming. It could actually be for anybody up here, and welcome an answer from anyone. One of the companies that I consult with is called Prognos, and the CEO, Sandeep Band, talks a lot about the have and the have-nots. In other words, AI companies that have the data and those that don't, just in terms of the bigger the data set or the higher the quality, the more valuable it is potentially. And with healthcare data, particularly in the United States, it may or may not be possible to get a hold of this data, the partnerships, the network, the relationships you might have to get it. Is there a concern around sort of a different type of digital divide, and that a company that's focused on artificial intelligence just doesn't have access to that data? Maybe speaking from the healthcare standpoint, I think people think of blockchain as being, when they hear that word, they think transparent, open, sharing, and so on, but the reality is that it may not allow for this kind of cross-pollination to happen for the good of the people who are in it. That AI, in the case of Prognos, is to help to diagnose, early diagnosis for people through the data. So I just wonder if you have some thoughts on that.
In United States already, people see the great potential and impact in AI field, so that they realize that we need to, we don't want to lose this opportunity. So that we like to collect a bigger data set somehow, so that National Institute of Health, NIH, initiate, and also each specialties. For example, I'm in the radiology field, so ACR, American College of Radiology, they try to set up new data warehouse or data lake. It's an anonymized data set, but this is for researchers and companies, and people like to develop AI algorithm to diagnose disease and classify and segmentation specific cancer lesions. So why this is happening? So it's surprisingly AI result is so good. So people see the value of giving up their data set to this for better purpose. So there is no strict regulation yet, but they try to make the kind of a roadmap to move forward. So I think that's why the blockchain is one of a great tool to make this happen in this field.
I think interesting you ask that question. So Australian is introducing a new legislation called consumer data rights. I think it's the world's first this kind of regulation, which enables consumers to have the right to share their data from banking sector, telecommunication, and energy sector. That's the first three designated sector with a third party. Basically, the consumers have that right, and the companies holding the data have to share it based on this regulation. And the decision at the moment is the standard setter for the API, for the security, privacy concern of those data. I think the goal of the Australian government is to level the playing field, considering a lot of the valuable data is locked up in some other places. When this data is being freed up, and how you are going to track how the data is being used, who is having what data, I think blockchain has a role to play in this space. We are already seeing a lot of companies, blockchain companies coming in, thinking about the innovative solutions.
Yeah, Chris, you wanted to comment?
The big opportunity here is to keep the data decentralized and send the algorithms to the data for learning, rather than sending the data up to the algorithms. And that's the way you can keep the data private, keep it in the hands of the people who should be owning it, should be able to monetize it.
Sorry, I should have called you Dr. Liming instead of Sinho. Anybody else want to respond to the idea of the have and have-nots, just in terms of the access to valuable data?
Can you repeat?
No, just in terms of the haves and have-nots, the access to data that's important for any sort of AI algorithm or machine learning to get access to. Are you concerned access to the yeah.
So like Professor Do has just mentioned, I mean the quality of data and the size of data is quite important. And again, we're speaking both about blockchain and AI. and I mentioned in the very beginning that you have storage, acquisition, filtration, and then processing. AI, blockchain at the moment is brilliant storage mechanism, not of the data, but like my fellow panelists said, for the hashes in there, but also processing happens using AI. We're noticing now a lot of proposals out there, nothing has materialized yet, for some kind of decentralized learning mechanisms and decentralized learning architectures, whereby data does not need to be stored in one specific place, and use the entire decentralized principle for these brilliant AI mechanisms and learning models to be able to access data sets that are decentralized, that are being collected in different nodes from in different locations. And I think that's where the real convergence that is going to happen, and that's where the real power is going to happen, because like we said, we need big data, but we need very high quality data. We need lean data. We need data of value. And the best way to do it is to rely on the entire decentralization principle, to be able to capitalize on that principle, to be able to come up with data sets that will improve your learning models and be able to optimize these models in such a way that will become more efficient and will lead to mechanisms where such systems sometimes would outperform human cognitions.
So you were saying about the collaboration of the data. We've been, so it's not just with blockchain that we've been collating large data sets. About 6 years ago, Stanford Health and GE Capital started a joint venture called Evidation Health to hold virtual trials. And what this did was it allowed you to have a wider and deeper data set, especially from those communities that were hard to reach. For instance, a lot of minority or immigrant populations that simply could not come into a clinic for a week while they're being tested. So those IFT devices that gave real-time feedback into a centralized database would help them keep constant, real-time monitoring of specific trials and speed up processes. And because it was Stanford Health working between private and public partnerships, they were able to actually connect millions of data sets specific to the aim of the research, right? So we're talking a centralized database, and you can drag and drop a piecemeal order the data sets that you want for specific functions. We could take that model, and there are blockchain projects that have been building on this for the last 2 or 3 years. But of course, as you know, it's a complicated problem, especially with GDPR. I don't know, with the law that says you cannot use any part of data that's identifiable, I don't think they've defined what is identifiable, and I don't know who that data belongs to once it dips in and out of enriched knowledge networks like we need to for our training machine learning, right? And so all of that has to be clarified, and the law is stunningly silent on this, and it will probably remain to do so for at least the next 10, 20 years as they get used to being implemented and used, right? And meanwhile, it'll set AI development back in Europe by about 10 years, right? So the blockchain features, the blockchain projects that are answering the model data set marketplace, as you're talking about, Ocean Protocol, they started building about 3 years ago, and I think they're making some headway because they're starting to participate in hackathons. SingularityNet raised about equivalent of $80 million about 2 years ago. That's by Ben Goertzel, and he's I guess what you call an outlier because he's part of that faction that believes that artificial intelligence can work towards general intelligence or general AI. I'm not sure how many gentlemen, which of you actually believe this. I think we're still a long ways away from that. So there are blockchain features that are coming up. The only things that I've seen that tends to work at enterprise scale has been DAGs, direct
cyclic graphs.
Graphs, the double consonants as an Asian, it's very hard. But yeah, DAGs work perfectly well, especially seamlessly with IFT devices to collate that data. But that's not a blockchain, it's just another distributed novel data structure. But most of the stuff, especially with AI, works very well centralized.
Dr. Lammy, a question for you. There's a new book coming out from Clive Thompson called Coders, and I think part of his mission is to sort of demystify what it means to create any algorithm or to program anything, and it's a lot of the discussion around blockchain. How important is it that the AI or machine learning algorithms become more transparent in the same way that people talk about blockchain?
Right. You can imagine a future that blockchain is not only for data sharing, but sometimes it's for running smart contracts. You can imagine a future that's all these agents running on the blockchain representing you. And you really want to make sure this agent representing you or in a DAO representing an organization is doing something aligned with your value. So that's whether you call it ethical by design, or also whether you basically looking at how the agent interacting with each other, how the ethics arriving from artificial intelligence agents talking to each other. That's an interesting, fascinating question by itself. So it's not just human ethics, it's AI to AI ethics. When you give the high-level principles and values, we already see some of this happening. So importantly, I think blockchain introduces this transparency again, introduces where all this data the AI is learning from, and that gives you some kind of additional trust on the AI and smart contracts behaving on behalf of you.
Chris, what about you in terms of what MOBI does, and from a consortium standpoint, does adding transparency to the process and to any AI initiative, is that important? How important is that? I guess is the question.
Well, the use case I mentioned earlier about autonomous driving data and the ability to share that. One thing about data is everybody says data is the new oil. Data is actually like oil in the sense that it's very important, but completely unlike oil in terms of the underlying economics. Oil, if I consume it, you can't consume the same barrel of oil. Data, if I use a piece of data, you can use the same piece, and so can you, and so can you, and so can everybody in the audience. And that's why data markets are so hard to create. I'm glad that you mentioned Ocean Protocol. Ocean Protocol is working on that problem of sharing large data sets and retaining property rights by keeping it decentralized and sending algorithms to data. So.
And Sinho, a question for you. In terms of you work with radiology and medical imaging, this is maybe different than people thinking of data sets. Is there an opportunity with machine learning to look at images? How far along are we with artificial intelligence and being able to look at either two-dimensional images and store those effectively, or am I overthinking this whole equation?
Actually, there are so many questions in this field. That's why we started this blockchain study at MGH, Mass General Hospital. When I announced that my lab, medical imaging and computation, we interested in, decided to work on this blockchain, there was a kind of debate. You guys in the hospital, why you are studying blockchain actually? But let me give you one great example why we really need a blockchain in this healthcare domain. We developed the brain hemorrhage detection algorithm. When we do the brain CT, there's a bleeding in your skull, inside of your skull. We like to detect it's bleeding or no bleeding, in a short time, because in a few minutes, your brain cell begins to die. So we like to detect the brain hemorrhage instantly. But usually the radiologists, they have many cases to read. But you are in the emergency room and you did a CT scan and you just need to wait. But we try to develop AI algorithm to do the CT scan automatically. As soon as you comes in, we can scan your CT scans like 0.2 seconds, and then we can tell there's a bleeding. Then there is a red flag. Oh, you radiologist, the emergency doctor, you should pay attention to this patient right away. But think about it. We deploy this in the CT scanners and in our IT system. Somebody attacked this AI algorithm. They changed the parameters. There is a brain hemorrhages, but the AI algorithm is not protected somehow. So that in this case, we can use blockchain to hash all these trained parameters, and we can confirm our initial trained parameters are intact, no changes, so that we know that this algorithm is secure to use. and safe to use, right? So that's how I started to look at this blockchain technology and to see the how to implement this blockchain to make my AI algorithm more secure. That's how I started.
Right. We don't have much time left, but I want to give each of the panelists an opportunity to outline maybe one challenge that you see ahead at this intersection of blockchain and AI, or a solution that you're excited about, or a bit of both, if you prefer. So, Susan.
The only things that I've been able to work is that that I think whatever's coming down the pipeline, it may not necessarily be a blockchain, but maybe DAGs, because I think those are the only things that seem to work in real time. What I've been seeing a lot in terms that AI is greatly helped by blockchain in terms of being able to track the flow and the collation of anonymized or aggregated data. And now what I'm finding is that as we're building more complicated distributed computing platforms, each of those blocks are needing machine learning to make sense of the throughputs and the patterns and the anti-patterns to detect any kind of anomaly that would show a breach in your data. So that's become very important. And now I'm also seeing within blockchain platforms using machine learning for the randomized consensus protocol, right, which will help with the latency and the scaling.
I mean, it makes me very happy to hear this, because even in our own laws and regulations, we refrain from using the word blockchain. We actually use DLT, decentralized ledger technology, out of which blockchain is a type. However, a DAG is not a blockchain, and it's a DLT. So it shows us that we are obviously in the right direction, and I think one of the main challenges is actually not on an AI level or a blockchain level, it's on a human level. We need to have more of these discussions with like-minded people, thought leaders, innovators, pioneers, and scholars in order for us to exchange notes, see what everyone is doing, make sure that we're all going on the right path, because at the end of the day, that's the best way to improve and optimize the processes and the strategies and the laws that we're building. As I said, with blockchain and DLT, we came up with laws and regulatory frameworks. With AI, we're coming up with a national strategy in Malta, which will be rolled out this October at Delta Summit, which I invite you all to be a part of that. And hopefully, in the process, we'll learn a lot from what everyone is doing. We're learning a lot from what the great city of Dubai is doing on the artificial intelligence front. We look up to everything that has been achieved in here, and hopefully we'll be able to contribute to this knowledge process.
Spirit of collaboration.
This is a great opportunity, but this is a great, the venue to meet the AI and blockchain. I think the blockchain has a solid technology, but people misunderstand the blockchain because of cryptocurrency and other issues. But this blockchain can do many things especially in healthcare domain. I'm in the radiology department, but when you look at the hospital level, there are so many problems you can solve with the blockchain. So continue to do the research, and we are happy to work with the people in anywhere. I closely working with the people in Korea and China, and hopefully in Dubai. So Malta also. Yeah. So this is a great opportunity to meet excellent experts here. Thank you for inviting me here to give a talk.
Great. Chris? Yeah.
So we have something called the MOBI Grand Challenge, which is an X-Prize style competition about coordinated autonomous vehicles. So right at the intersection of IoT, AI, and blockchain. We have a panel discussion on it later today at 2:40, so I won't say a lot about it right now. You can come to that and hear more.
Great. Dr. Zhu?
Just briefly, I think as AI is impacting every aspect of life, the trust in the AI algorithm or where the data they are coming from, we really need that trust. And blockchain plays a critical role of having data integrity, model integrity, underpinning that trust. I think combining two technology is very powerful.
Great. Dr. Zhu, Chris, Sinho, Bella, and Susan, thank you all so much. A round of applause for our panelists up here.
Thank you.
Thanks.